Welcome to The Cow Behind the Barn, a podcast exploring humanity, the world, and the divine as experienced and interpreted by an artist. I'm Kevin Caldwell, a co-founder of the Table Collective. I shouldn't be surprised that physics is revealing to me that time is not what I thought it was for most of my life. In the last episode, I focused on what I call the pragmatic and practical ways of seeing time, the way that daily life just requires us to use and measure and speak of time. The next episode will explore philosophical approaches to time, including ways of understanding time within some of the world's religious heritages. But physics and time, or the physics of time, is the focus of this episode. Before I start to portray what I've been gleaning from physicists about time, which will be done in prose, I want to turn to poetry, a portion of a piece I published in my Cow Behind the Barn book called 3 Ways of Seeing a Doorway Between Two Hallways. I wrote it long before I began to dig into what physics might say. The poem began as a way of reflecting on an experience I had one morning, seeing my wife as she passed from one hallway into another, through a doorway that connected both hallways to the room where I was sitting as she passed. As such, it was like a moment caught in a frozen frame of time, and it caused me to reflect in 3 ways about the same event, which I referred to as 3 ways of seeing. Now, I'm going to leave out the first way from that piece, which I called seeing in prose, but I will share the other 2, which I refer to as seeing in haiku and seeing in blank verse.
Seeing in haiku. She passed the doorway, eyes met, hands waved, and then gone. I am here alone. Seeing in blank verse. From behind a wall, the sounds of a door, and bare feet in a hall. Through the doorway, rounding a corner, she passes from one unseen to the next. Our eyes meet, hands wave. We are mouthing soundless words of greeting in the gray light. The moment, fleeting, is gone, and I am here alone.
Now, the poem is a way of describing the present, the doorway, and the past and the future, the 2 different hallways. It's experiential, and if I had to summarize a view of time from it, I would say things like, in the present moment there are sounds from the past, a door, feet in the hall. The sounds metaphorically are the events of the past, and they're real and present, but not fully. The future is much more mysterious. It's still unseen and unknown. The present passes and is gone, as do the people in our present moments. That's how I described in poetry the experience, inspired by an actual event in my life. But what will physics have to say about it? In order to answer that, I'm going to arrange the questions about time that I asked in the prior episode so that they give me some sense of structure for my material. I've come up with 2 questions that are like big buckets into which the other questions all seem to fit. The 2 questions are, is time absolute? And what's the nature of the past, present, future? So first, is time absolute? This includes questions such as whether time is the same everywhere, and is it the same in its relationship to everything and to everyone? Is time the same, I dare say, all the time? What's the nature of past, present, and future? This includes questions like, does time pass or move, or is it just the way that we experience it? Is it more accurate to say that we pass and move through time? Does time only go in one direction, or do we only go in one direction ourselves? Do times other than the present moment exist? Is this present moment the only real time? Does only now actually exist? Do the past and the future have any existence? And the present? What does that mean? How long or short does a point in time need to be to qualify as a present moment? 1 second? A nanosecond? Does the present moment ever exist? Is there ever really a now? Now, there's going to be a third bucket as well, which I might call the relationship of time and consciousness, but that's something to be looked at in, well, the future. So, on to the physics of time. Is time absolute? If time is absolute, then time is the same everywhere, for everyone. That's just sort of the definition of what it means to say that it's absolute, and it's always that way. However, physics tells us that time moved twice as slow 14 billion years ago and 12 times slower 32 billion years ago. Time is faster now than it was in the past, and it seems like time will be faster in the future than it is now. Time is not the same at all times. Is time the same in all places? Well, after Albert Einstein, there's a near consensus among physicists that time flows at different rates depending on various factors. One of those factors is gravity. Gravity is different depending on where we are in the universe, so time is not the same in every place. Is time the same everywhere and always? No. We already have a simple answer to the question whether time is absolute. So we can say it this way as well, that time is local to a place and to a moment. In a very real sense, then, time is personal, even subjective. I don't mean that it's subjective in the sense that we each make it up, but in the sense that each person will experience time differently depending on where they are and, frankly, when they are, or when they were, or when they will be. What we call time is really the result of an entanglement between a constantly changing universe and we who, at different times and places, are experiencing it. Time and the subject experiencing it are entangled. In fact, I think the nature of time is that entangled experience itself. One factor that gives us the illusion of time as a real thing is the fact that we have created and used rather arbitrary methods of measuring our experiences of change. We talked about this a bit in the last episode. We've named those measurements things like seconds and hours and months, and these definitions begin to take on a sense of essential reality for us, giving the impression of time as an absolute thing. Past and present and future are part of that experience. But if time is not absolute, then neither are they. Exploring what I mean by that begins to bleed into the next big question about the nature of past, present, and future. So let's turn there. If there's no objective, absolute cosmic time, so to speak, then there's no cosmic present. And if time is different in different places and at different times, then what we call now is going to be different in different places and times as well. It follows that the same will be true for the past and the future. That's not, of course, how we normally speak of our experience of time. For most of us, I think it's safe to say that our most common way of thinking about past, present, and future might be something like this. The past is full of things that used to be the present, and when they were the present, they were real. But now they've slipped out of reality and exist only in the cognitive function that we call memory, which contains merely the shadowy traces that are left in our cognitive worlds. The future only exists as a myriad of potentialities and possibilities, as ideas which we can form within the cognitive function we call imagination. These ideas are not real, no matter how accurate our statistical probabilities may be. Events are not real until they happen as part of a present moment. In other words, we remember the past, we imagine the future, we only know the present. Only the present is real. Well, what does physics say to this normal way of thinking? Albert Einstein once wrote to a friend, "The past, the present, and the future are only illusions, even if very stubborn ones." Einstein's theory of relativity denies any absolute universal significance even to the present moment. As we've seen, the pace of time has been speeding up, and our location relative to the cosmos affects the pace of time in our experience. There is no present moment shared by every single thing and being in the cosmos. We do not simultaneously share the same now. According to special relativity, such simultaneity is relative to where we are and when. Physicists have used various word pictures and examples to try to describe the past, present, and future, and I'm going to include 3 that I've come across. For the first, let's imagine someone on Earth asking a question like, what's happening on Mars right now? Considering that Earth and Mars are about 20 light minutes apart from each other and that information cannot travel faster than light, an Earth-based observer is unable to know the situation on Mars at the same instant, and vice versa. We would have to infer the answer after the events have happened, after information has had a chance to travel back and forth, perhaps several times. This example demonstrates the impossibility of a now that 2 subjects might be able to know simultaneously. But this does not necessarily mean that there's not a now that does not exist, or that there is a now that doesn't exist. But does it? The second illustration is more to the point of whether the present moment in fact actually exists, and by extension then, what's the nature of past and future as well. So imagine that we decide to film ourselves as we drop an egg to the floor. The film will show the egg leaving our hand, falling through the air, landing on the floor, and shattering. We can run the film backward or forward or freeze it at various points. Let's also say that for this example, we used physical film and not a phone. We can cut the film up into frames, which we can then shuffle randomly. It would be easy to rearrange the frames into an ordered sequence, to recreate the flow of the event. We arrange the frames with the intact egg first and the broken egg at the end of the sequence. We can also reverse the order of the frames and have the broken egg at the beginning and the intact egg at the end. Here's the point. What we call time is actually the way we experience the flow of those different events in the frames, from the egg in the hand to, say, the egg 11.3 inches from the floor, to the exact moment of impact. Exact moment of impact. That's actually where things begin to get even more tricky. In theory, there is an exact moment of impact, but it is so infinitesimally small as to be beyond the ability of any human faculty or instrument to actually measure or grasp, meaning we don't know the exact moment of impact. I'm not saying then that the present moment does not exist, but it exists at a speed which we can never know. We can't freeze the frame at exactly the moment of now. In that way, we can never be in the present. We're constantly in the process of change, never in the now in between. This brings me to the third example. Some physicists use the word timescape. Think of it the way we do a landscape, in which we can see things near and far, and if we turn around, we see what's behind us as well. In a landscape, everything is there, even if at a given moment or from a given angle, we don't look at it or see it. The idea of timescape means that all past and future events are located there in the timescape together. What determines whether an event is past or present or future is our experience of it, from our reference point as the one experiencing it. So imagine a landscape with an oak tree. The oak tree is there, but I only say there it is when I have the line of sight to be able to see it. With timescape, think of the events of the past and present and future like the oak tree or oak trees. They are there in the scape all the time, however my experience of them changes. For some physicists, the past and present and future are there in the timescape all the time. Now, this raises lots of questions about determinism and whether everything is already laid out, and these are going to be philosophical questions that we'll come back to in the future. But for now, simultaneity, or the now, is relative. Time's the experience of things changing. Past, present, and future are all in the same scape. Let me try to offer some tentative conclusions as I combine these 3 things, these 3 ways of seeing that physicists have offered. I see the tree, it's there, seemingly right now, but I'm actually seeing it slightly later than the moment that the tree experiences as now, because it takes time for light signals to go back and forth between an observer and an object. Now, of course, that happens very, very rapidly. Light travels thousands of miles in a fraction of a second. However, if we had the ability to capture such fractions of time into frames like that falling egg, we could break down the present moment from the perspective of each subject in a frame. In this case, from the perspective of myself and the oak tree, and it would be something like this. From my center of experience, my present moment is already in the oak tree's past from its experience. From the frame of reference for the oak tree's present moment is still in my future, but it is there. The past and the future are both present, in each case relative to the subject experiencing a present moment. So there is no actual now, not in an absolute sense, not in a way we can actually pinpoint or measure. For any measurement will require the capture of what is moving, not literally necessarily, but moving in the sense of this exchange that is really the meeting point of the oak tree's future and my past, which is neither of our present. What is real is the experience of time passing away, which is in fact our experience of the process of change. At a personal level, I've spent a lot of time trying to be present in the moment, to live in the present. It's something that many of us have been encouraged to do, I think, and I thought it was sound advice, so I really tried in times of meditation. I tried to explore that attempt in a song that I wrote called Spaces, and it's not out there ready for release, but I'm working on a version that will be. So for now, here's a draft, or what we might call a demo version of my song, Spaces.
See the red moon rising, dead sun going down, bones of the mountains lay around me, hear voices that do not make a sound, trying to live inside the spaces between my was and my will-being, hoping behind my empty faces is the fullness of life I cannot see. All my persons and my personas, forged in the faded works of art, gliding past me in a mirror that's outside yet deep inside my heart, trying to live inside the spaces of my was and my will be, hoping that behind my empty faces is a fullness of a life I cannot see. Cling to pieces of the wreckage, a sunken vessel of my life. Feel the grip of fingers slipping. Voice says just let go and slide into that place between the spaces my was and my will be. Find the face behind my faces, fullness of the life that lives in me.
In reality, all my attempts to experience the present have just evaporated. It's just never really there in my experience, and now I think physics is helping me understand why. If time is our way of experiencing change, if time is a byproduct of the process of change, then time is something more akin to heat or cold, which are both byproducts of other processes, but which we experience in certain ways. Time is more like that than it is like a thing that actually exists. Therefore, my attempts to be in the present moment, as for example in the song, will remain a chase for an elusive impossibility. What I can be present with is the experience of change, however. And that's more my focus now in meditation, a habit I seek to cultivate through my day. My reflections on this begin to take me beyond physics into philosophy. But I want to conclude the episode by offering my initial thoughts about the implications of the physics of time for the cognitive functions of memory and imagination. Memory is a way that the process of change continues in our experience of it. The present experience of a moment or an event or a thing may not be able to be frozen and held in our awareness. However, it continues within the cognitive faculty we call memory. It's in this sense just as real as the original experience of that thing, of that process of change between its present and our future and our present and its past. It can be experienced repeatedly, and it all still exists to the memory, to the one remembering. Indeed, in the one remembering. It's as real as when it happened, and both are experiential and, dare I say, subjective, in that they both exist in the experience of the subjects experiencing them. As I put it in another song, memory's just another way of seeing all the things that we're still being. What about the future? Is imagination the mirror image of the memory? Is it indeed perhaps the same faculty as memory, but just applied in a different direction, a different portion of the timescape, to bring back a concept from earlier? Now I can hear a question here, or even an objection. But Kevin, our imaginations are just pictures that we make of imaginary events and conversations. They're fiction. Even if we load them with statistical probabilities, the fact that some things turn out exactly or nearly as we imagined does not mean our imaginations were experiencing anything real before it happened. My emerging way of understanding this is honestly still, emerging. My way of understanding is rooted in ways I think about consciousness and what it means to be a subject, and what my own understanding of whether there is a big S subject means for all of this. If one of the subjects is a big S subject outside the world that physics is describing, and if we're entangled with other subjects, including that subject, then memory and imagination and knowing might be much more complex and mysterious than the already quite complex and mysterious cognition that we experience, we who are small s subjects. This episode has brought up new questions for me about that experience, and in doing so, I think it's actually taken me back to the poem that I shared earlier and my experiences of that doorway and that hallway and the questions I asked at that time. I can summarize some new questions this way. Were my wife and I actually in the same moment when I saw her pass? Was the moment actually gone once she did pass? And if it wasn't, then was I actually alone, as I thought I was? Well, now I've really stepped through the door from the physics of time into the philosophy of time and into consciousness as well, and so of entanglement and all of those things. And I need to bring myself back one step at a time. In the next episode, I'll begin to dig into the philosophy of time, including the ways that some religious heritages have seen it. Consciousness and entanglement will need to wait a little bit longer. Until next time.